you ever woken up and thought, what's the point? Not in a dramatic, suicidal way, but in that quiet, gnawing sense that everything you're doing is just arbitrary. You go to work, you pay bills, you chase goals, you have relationships, you try to be happy. But somewhere deep inside, a voice whispers, this is all meaningless, isn't it? Maybe you've tried to silence that voice. Maybe you've thrown yourself into productivity, into success, into religion, into love, into anything that promises to give your life significance. But late at night, when the distractions fade, that feeling returns, the emptiness, the sense that you're just pushing a boulder up a hill only for it to roll back down, slowly, again and again and again. And here's what terrifies you most. What if that voice is right? What if there is no grand purpose? What if the universe doesn't care about your struggles, your dreams, your pain? What if everything you've been told about meaning, that you'll find it in achievement, in family, in service, in God? What if it's all just a story we tell ourselves to avoid facing the truth? But let me tell you something that might change everything. The problem isn't that life is meaningless. The problem is that you're still pretending it's not. Albert Camus, one of the most profound thinkers of the 20th century, understood something that most people spend their entire lives running from. He said, there is only one really serious philosophical question, and that is suicide. Not because he wanted you to end your life, but because he wanted you to answer this. If life has no inherent meaning, why keep living? And his answer will either destroy you or set you free. If you've made it this far, it's not by chance. This video is for you who are tired of pretending that hustle culture will save you. It's for you who feel like you're performing a role in a play that has no audience. It's for you who secretly wonder if everyone else has figured out the meaning of life while you're still lost. I want to show you that you're not broken, you're awake. And that awakening, as painful as it is the beginning of something far more honest than any false hope could ever offer. But for that, you will have to face the void. You will have to look at the absurdity of existence without flinching. And perhaps, for the first time, this confrontation will give you the only kind of freedom that's real. Let's get started. Part 1. The Absurd Awakening. You think what's crushing you is depression, burnout, or a lack of purpose. But it's none of those things. What you're experiencing is called the absurd, and it's the most honest thing you've ever felt. Camus described the absurd as the collision between two truths, your deep human need for meaning, and the universe's silent indifference to that need. You want your life to matter. You want your suffering to have a reason. You want there to be a point to waking up every day and doing the same things over and over. But the universe? It doesn't answer. It doesn't care. It just is. And this creates a fundamental conflict that you cannot escape. You are a meaning-seeking creature in a meaningless world. You are a question shouted into a void that never responds. Camus wrote, at any street corner, the feeling of absurdity can strike any man in the face. It happens in the most mundane moments. You're sitting in traffic, doing the same commute you've done 1,000 times, and suddenly you think, why am I doing this? You're at a party, surrounded by people, having the same shallow conversations, and you feel completely alone. You achieve the goal you spent years chasing, and the moment you reach it, you realize it changed nothing. This is not a mental illness. This is clarity. You are finally seeing life as it actually is, stripped of the comforting narratives we layer over it. But here's where it gets dangerous. Most people, when they feel the absurd, panic. They immediately scramble to cover it back up. They dive into work, into relationships, into ideologies, into distractions. anything to avoid sitting with that uncomfortable truth. They become busier, louder, more desperate to prove that their life means something. And you've done this too, haven't you? You've tried to fill the void with achievement, with substances, with entertainment, with constant motion. Because if you stop moving, if you allow silence, the question returns. What is this all for? Camus knew this panic intimately. He said, beginning to think is beginning to be undermined. Because once you start questioning, once you pull at the thread of meaning, slowly the entire fabric starts to unravel. And most people will do anything to stop that unraveling. But you can't unthink what you've already seen. You can't unfeel the absurd once it has revealed itself to you. The only question now is, what do you do with it? And this is where most people make a fatal mistake. They think there are only two options: either find meaning somehow, or give up entirely. Either believe in something, or end it all. But Camus saw a third way. A way that requires neither blind faith nor surrender. A way that embraces the absurd instead of fleeing from it. And this way is so counterintuitive, so opposite to everything you've been taught, that it will require you to let go of every comforting lie you've ever told yourself. Are you ready? Because in the next part, we're going to explore the false escapes, the ways people try to avoid the absurd, and why every single one of them is a betrayal of your own intelligence. Let's continue. It's about to get uncomfortable. If this content is resonating with you, click the subscribe button. Thank you for your support. Part 2. The False Escapes. You are suffering because you refuse to accept the absurd, and instead of facing it, you keep running toward false solutions that promise to make the meaninglessness go away. But they never do. They just numb you. Camus identified 3 major escapes that humans use to avoid confronting the absurd, and you've probably tried all of them. The first escape is physical suicide. If life has no meaning, why continue? Just end it. But Camus rejected this immediately. He said, suicide is a confession. It is confessing that life is too much for you, or that you do not understand it. Physical suicide is not a solution to the absurd. It's an evasion. It's saying, I can't handle the question, so I'll eliminate the questioner. But the question remains. The absurd remains. You don't solve the problem by destroying yourself. The second escape is philosophical suicide. This is more subtle, and it's the one most people choose. Philosophical suicide is when you leap into a belief system that promises to give your life meaning. Religion, ideology, cosmic purpose, karma, destiny. Anything that says, don't worry, there is a reason for everything. Camus saw this as intellectual cowardice. He wrote, the absurd is lucid reason noting its limits. To embrace religion or any other grand narrative is to abandon reason the moment it becomes uncomfortable. It's to say, I can't live without meaning, so I'll invent some, even if I have no evidence for it. And maybe you've done this. Maybe you've told yourself, everything happens for a reason. Maybe you've clung to the idea that the universe has a plan, that your suffering serves some higher purpose, that it will all make sense one day. But deep down, you know you're just comforting yourself with a story. You know you're choosing ignorance over truth, because truth is too hard. The third escape is hope, and this is the most insidious one, because it sounds positive. Hope says, yes, life is hard now, but it will get better. Just keep going. Just keep working. Just keep believing that eventually meaning will arrive. But Camus saw hope as a trap. Hope is just another way of refusing to live in the present. It's saying, I can't accept this moment as it is, so I'll project happiness into the future. Camus wrote, one must imagine Sisyphus happy, not hoping for the boulder to stay at the top, but happy in the very act of pushing it. Because hope is what keeps you enslaved to the illusion that the struggle will end. But it won't. The boulder always rolls back down. So where does this leave you? You can't kill yourself. You can't lie to yourself with comforting beliefs. You can't postpone your life by hoping for some future resolution. What's left? This is the moment where most people give up. They think, if I can't escape the absurd, then I'm doomed to despair. But Camus saw something else. He saw that the absurd, when fully embraced, is not a curse, it's liberation. Because once you stop running, once you stop begging the universe for answers it will never give, once you accept that life is fundamentally meaningless and that nothing you do will ever change that, something extraordinary happens. You become free. And this freedom is not happiness in the way you've been taught to want it. It's not comfort. It's not peace. It's something rawer, more alive, more defiant. And to understand this, we need to meet the man who embodies it perfectly. The man condemned to push a boulder up a mountain for all eternity, only to watch it roll back down, over and over and over. We need to talk about Sisyphus. And this is where everything changes. Let's go deeper. Part 3. The Myth of Sisyphus. There's an ancient Greek myth that Camus believed contained the entire human condition in one image, and once you see it, you'll never unsee it. Sisyphus was a king who defied the gods, and for his arrogance, for his refusal to submit, he was given the ultimate punishment. He was condemned to push a boulder up a mountain, and every time he reached the top, the boulder would roll back down, and he would have to start again. Forever. No end, no victory, no escape, just the same meaningless task, repeated for eternity. Most people hear this story and think, that's hell. That's the worst punishment imaginable. And that's exactly why Camus chose it. Because Sisyphus is you. His punishment is your life. Think about it. You wake up, you go to work, you come home, you sleep, repeat. You pursue goals, you achieve them, and then you need new goals, repeat. You seek happiness, you grasp it for a moment, and then it slips away. Repeat. You build relationships, they end, you start again. Repeat. You try to create meaning, it dissolves, you try again. Repeat. The boulder always rolls back down. And here's the part that destroys most people. There is no moment where the boulder stays at the top. There is no final achievement that makes the struggle worthwhile. There is no ultimate meaning waiting at the end. The struggle itself is all there is. Camus wrote, "The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. Not the arrival, not the victory, the struggle. But how? How can the struggle be enough when you know it leads nowhere?" This is where Camus makes his most radical move. He asks you to imagine something that seems impossible. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. Happy? How can someone condemned to eternal, meaningless labor be happy? How can you be happy when you know that everything you do is ultimately futile? Because happiness, in the way Camus means it, is not about outcomes. It's not about whether your life produces lasting meaning. It's about how you exist within the absurdity. Sisyphus is happy because he is fully conscious. He knows his fate. He knows the boulder will roll back down. He knows the gods intended this as torture. And yet, he chooses to push it anyway. Not because he's deluded, not because he's hoping for a different outcome, but because in that act of pushing, he is alive, he is defiant, he is free. Camus wrote, "There is no fate that cannot be surmounted by scorn." Sisyphus scorns his punishment by refusing to let it break him. The gods wanted him to despair, to beg for release, to be crushed by the futility. But instead, he owns it. He says, "This is my boulder, this is my mountain, and I will push it with full awareness and full commitment. Not because it matters in some cosmic sense, but because it is mine. And this is what you've been missing. You've been waiting for your life to mean something before you fully commit to it. You've been holding back, saving yourself for some future moment when the struggle will finally make sense. But that moment never comes. And in waiting for it, you've never actually lived. Sisyphus doesn't wait. He pushes, fully, completely, with every fiber of his being. Not because he believes the boulder will stay at the top, but because the act of pushing is the only honest response to a meaningless existence. And in that act, he becomes more than a victim of the absurd. He becomes its master. But how do you do this? How do you live like Sisyphus? How do you embrace the absurd without falling into nihilism, without giving up, without becoming bitter and resentful? That's what we're going to explore in the next part. Because accepting that life is meaningless is only half the journey. The other half is learning to live fully, passionately, defiantly, precisely because it's meaningless. And this is where Camus' philosophy becomes not just an idea, but a way of life. Let's continue. We're almost there. Part 4. The Revolt. You've accepted the absurd. You've stopped running from the truth. You've looked at the meaninglessness of existence without flinching. But now what? Now comes the hardest part. Living anyway. Most people think that accepting meaninglessness leads to passivity, to giving up, to a kind of defeated nihilism where nothing matters, so why even try? But Camus saw the exact opposite. He called it revolt. Revolt is not rebellion against external forces. It's not protest against society or gods or fate. Revolt is the internal stance you take when you fully accept the absurd and still choose to live with intensity, passion, and defiance. Camus wrote, "The absurd man says yes, and his effort will henceforth be unceasing. Yes to life, even though it has no meaning. Yes to the struggle, even though it leads nowhere. Yes to existence, even though the universe is indifferent." This is not optimism. Optimism is believing things will get better. Revolt is knowing they won't, and living fully anyway. Think about what this means practically. It means you stop waiting for your life to begin. You stop postponing joy until you achieve something. You stop telling yourself, "I'll be happy when I get the promotion, when I find the right person, when I figure out my purpose," because you now understand there is no when. There is only now. And now is all there ever will be. Revolt means you live without hope, but also without despair. You engage fully with life, not because it will lead somewhere meaningful, but because engagement itself is the only authentic response to existence. Camus described this as living with a wild and incomprehensible happiness. Not the shallow happiness of getting what you want, but the deep happiness of being fully alive in a meaningless world. The happiness of Sisyphus, who pushes his boulder with complete awareness and complete commitment. But here's what makes this so difficult. Revolt requires you to let go of every comforting narrative you've ever clung to. You can no longer tell yourself that your suffering has a purpose. You can no longer believe that the universe is testing you, that karma exists, that everything happens for a reason. You have to face the raw, unfiltered truth. You suffer because you exist, and existence does not justify itself. And yet, in that very confrontation, something shifts. When you stop demanding that life justify itself to you, when you stop asking why and start asking how. How will I live? How will I engage? How will I create meaning even though there is no inherent meaning? You discover a freedom that's unavailable to those still clinging to false hopes. You are no longer at the mercy of external validation. You no longer need the world to give you permission to feel significant. You are no longer waiting for some cosmic answer that will never come. You create your own meaning, knowing full well that it's subjective, temporary, and ultimately arbitrary. And you do it anyway. Camus said, "The struggle toward the heights is enough, not because the heights contain some reward, but because the struggle itself, engaged fully and consciously, is what it means to be human." This is what Sisyphus understood that the gods didn't. They thought they were punishing him with meaningless labor, but he transformed that labor into an act of defiance, of self-creation, of freedom. Every time the boulder rolls back down, he walks back down that mountain fully aware of what awaits him. And in that walk, in that moment of consciousness between efforts, he is free because he has accepted his fate without being destroyed by it. And you can do the same. You can look at your repetitive, ordinary, absurd life and say, "This is mine. I do not need it to mean something to the universe. I will make it mean something to me." But this requires one final shift, one final acceptance that most people never make. And it's the acceptance of your own finitude, your own mortality, your own absolute aloneness in this existence. Because if you're going to live like Sisyphus, if you're going to embrace the absurd fully, you must also embrace the fact that you will die, that everything you build will crumble, that nothing you do will last, and that this doesn't make it less valuable. It makes it more valuable. And that's what we're going to face in the final part. The ultimate confrontation, living fully in the shadow of death, creating meaning in the face of nothingness, becoming who you are before time runs out. We're going all the way now. Let's finish this. Part 5. Consciousness as freedom. You've come this far, and now there's only one truth left to face. Death. Not as some distant abstract concept, but as the ultimate absurdity. Everything you do, everything you create, everything you love, it all ends. You end, and the universe will continue as if you never existed. Most people spend their entire lives avoiding this confrontation. They distract themselves. They comfort themselves with afterlife beliefs. They tell themselves that their legacy will live on. But Camus asks you to face it directly. You are going to die, and nothing you do will change that. Your life, no matter how intensely lived, will ultimately be erased. And this is where most philosophies offer you hope. They tell you death is not the end. They tell you there's something beyond. But Camus refuses to give you that comfort. He says, there is nothing beyond this. This is all you have. And that's exactly why you must live it fully. Camus wrote, "A man's work is nothing but this slow trek to rediscover, through the detours of art, those 2 or 3 great and simple images in whose presence his heart first opened." In other words, you are here to experience, to feel, to be conscious, not to achieve some eternal significance, but to be fully alive in the brief, absurd window of time you've been given. And here's the paradox that saves everything. The very fact that life is finite and meaningless is what makes your choices matter. If you lived forever, if every action had cosmic significance, you'd be a slave to those meanings. But because nothing ultimately matters, everything you choose to do matters to you right now. You are free to create your own values, your own meaning, your own life, without needing anyone or anything to validate it. This is consciousness as freedom. Not the freedom to escape the absurd, but the freedom to exist within it fully, deliberately, authentically. Think about what this means for your life right now. You're not broken because you can't find your purpose. You're not failing because you haven't discovered the meaning of existence. There is no secret purpose to discover. There is only the life you have, right now, and the choice of how to live it. You can waste it waiting for meaning to arrive. You can waste it chasing goals that you think will finally satisfy you. You can waste it in despair, convinced that meaninglessness makes effort pointless. Or you can do what Sisyphus does. You can push your boulder with full consciousness, full commitment, and yes, even happiness. Not because the boulder will stay at the top, but because you are alive to push it. Camus gives you permission to stop pretending. You don't have to act like your job is meaningful when it feels meaningless. You don't have to pretend your relationships fulfill some cosmic purpose. You don't have to justify your existence to anyone, including yourself. But what you do have to do is live, intensely, presently, without waiting for permission from the universe. You have to embrace the absurd fully, the meaninglessness, the futility, the indifference of existence. And then, in full awareness of that, choose to engage anyway, choose to love anyway, choose to create anyway, choose to struggle anyway. Because that choice, made consciously in the face of the absurd, is the only authentic freedom there is. And here's the final twist that Camus offers you. The moment you stop demanding that life provide you with meaning, the moment you stop waiting for external validation, the moment you accept that you are alone in a meaningless universe, you become untouchable. Not because nothing affects you, but because your worth is no longer tied to whether the universe acknowledges you. Your purpose is no longer dependent on whether your actions have lasting significance. Your happiness is no longer conditional on outcomes you cannot control. You are free. Not free from the absurd, but free within it. Sisyphus pushes his boulder, it rolls back down, and he is happy. Not because he's deluded, not because he's given up, but because he has accepted his fate without being broken by it. He has taken ownership of his existence, even though his existence is absurd. And so can you. The question Camus began with was, why not suicide if life is meaningless? And his answer is simple but profound. Because life, lived consciously and fully in the face of meaninglessness, is the only rebellion available to us. It is the only authentic act of defiance against a silent, indifferent universe. You don't need meaning to live. You just need consciousness, courage, and the willingness to push your boulder. That's it. That's the whole truth. And it's either the most freeing thing you've ever heard, or the most terrifying. But if you're still here, if you've stayed with me through this entire journey, then you already know which one it is. Now that you've made it this far, there's something that needs to be said very clearly. Nothing will give your life meaning except the act of living it. The universe will never answer your questions. The boulder will always roll back down. But you have the choice to push it anyway, consciously, definitely, fully alive. Albert Camus said, "In the depth of winter, I finally learned that within me there lay an invincible summer. That summer is not hope. It's not belief. It's not some future reward. It's the raw, unshakable aliveness that comes from accepting the absurd and living anyway." If this video touched you in some way, if something within you has shifted, write here in the comments, "I choose to push." Let's start a movement of people who no longer wait for meaning to be given to them, but create it themselves, in full awareness that it won't last, and choosing to do it anyway. And don't forget, the next video is also part of this journey. Real transformation only begins when you don't stop at the first step. One must imagine you happy. See you there.